So there is no audio.
Yeah, I'm not started still. I think people are still joining. Just 2 more minutes and I'll start. Okay, so let us move on to the next supervised learning technique, the next statistical learning technique. This is clustering. Any questions so far? So we have finished the supervised learning techniques, regression and classification. So this one is an unsupervised learning technique. It looks a bit similar to classification, but it's a different kind of problem. It is unsupervised. Classification is supervised. This is unsupervised. So we have qualitatively seen what is clustering. Clustering aims to group together similar data points. And it has a lot of applications in many domains, including pattern recognition, image processing, and so on. We try to find trends and patterns in data for using clustering. Like many techniques, we can easily visualize clusters when we plot it in 2 dimension, especially with a scatter plot. But in multiple dimensions, we are not able to detect clusters ourselves. That's where these automated algorithms help in clustering. And the simple application which already all of you are familiar with is what happens when you do a search on Google. Google has indexed a lot of documents, billions of documents. And when you type in a keyword, there are thousands and thousands of documents which match the keyword. And if it presents all these pages to you, it might be very confusing to you. It may be very difficult. Whereas what it does is it has already clustered all the documents, formed it into groups, and then it finds what is most relevant from the representative group, and it presents it to you. It becomes much easier to the presentation becomes much easier because we are ignoring a lot of things which are exactly the similar to what you are presented with. So similarly, it helps in simplifying the presentation, just like what we said about dimensionality reduction. This is not reducing the dimensionality, but similar process that takes place by removing data points which are not that interesting to us. So we cluster it and find out which point lies within each cluster. So we assume that within a cluster, whatever small variations are there are not that important. Now for doing clustering, the most important thing is we need to define what is the similarity metric or the distance metric. All the clustering takes place by using this parameter, this function. This is basically we calculate what is the distance between 2 points within the data set, and points which are similar, that is having minimum distance, are put in the same cluster, and we also want to maximize the distance between clusters. So we say intra-class similarity should be high and inter-class similarity should be low. So this is how we try to form the clusters. There are many algorithms for clustering. Is hierarchical clustering, non-hierarchical clustering. These are the two main types. Non-hierarchical clustering, we have the most common is the k-means clustering. I will explain both the types. These are simple algorithms. So which again, you can even do manually if you like, or you can write simple programs for doing this. So in hierarchical clustering, we start with a flat list of all the data points. So in this example, here I have, let us say, 6 data points, A, B, C, D, E, and F, having different attributes. And to start with, we put each point into a separate cluster. So A is one cluster, B is another cluster, C is the another cluster, and so on. So to start with, everything is in a separate cluster. Now we compute the distance between clusters. Look at which points are close by, which are most similar. So for example, you might find that A and E have minimum distance. So you merge A and E together into one cluster. Now we have one cluster which consists of A and E. And then we have all the remaining clusters. Again, you calculate the distance and find out which are close by. So probably the next time D and F are found to be similar. So you merge that together into another cluster. So we have one new cluster, and maybe next time maybe B and C are merged together. So you get one cluster here. Now again, you calculate the distance between clusters. So maybe you find that these two clusters are most similar. So that is merged. So finally, what you get is a hierarchy of clusters. At the root, you have one cluster containing all the data points, which is subdivided into two clusters, which is further subdivided all the way to the leaf, where you have one point lying within each cluster. So this is the idea of hierarchical clustering. And what I described just now is called bottom-up hierarchical clustering. You start from the bottom, start with one cluster containing one data point, and you start merging, going all the way to the top. But in the end, what you get is a hierarchy of clusters. You don't get a fixed number of clusters like in k-means clustering. I'm going to explain that just now. So in non-hierarchical clustering, for example, in k-means clustering, we start with a fixed number of clusters. This is specified a priori. So user says, I want to find out 3 clusters in the data. So you randomly associate points to 3 clusters. I have not explained the algorithm in detail here, but qualitatively, this is what you do. You randomly assign centroids to these clusters, and then you examine each point and see to which cluster the point lies. The cluster which is closest to the point, which is the cluster which is the closest to the point is assigned to that cluster. Then you take the next point and so on. So you repeat over all the points, compute the distance to each cluster, and finally you assign the point to each cluster. So you get a set of clusters. Now you can start with a different starting point. Randomly you can start with a different centroid for the cluster and repeat the process, and finally you get a set of clusters. So here the difference between hierarchical clustering and k-means clustering is that in k-means clustering, you specify the number of clusters a priori, and it will find the number these clusters. Whereas in hierarchical clustering, you don't a priori fix the number of clusters. You form the hierarchy, and now if you want to find out how many, suppose you want only 3 clusters. So you might prune at an appropriate level in the tree. So let us say I want to find out only two clusters. So probably these two will become the clusters. So one cluster consisting of A, D, E, and F, another cluster consisting of B and C. If you want three clusters, again you look at where you need to prune the tree, and you can find an appropriate the location where you can prune the tree, and you identify the number of clusters. Okay, so these are two common clustering algorithms. Now, a practical use for clustering. One possibility is you can determine the clusters in your data set, and you can have a separate model for each cluster. For example, if you try to do regression among all the data points, you may not be very successful because the line may not pass through all the data points. But suppose you identify, let's say there are two or three clusters in your data, and for each cluster you try to develop a separate model. That is likely to be more accurate. So I take I've taken this example in a same. You have seen this curve before. This is the load deflection curve of a nonlinear spring. So I asked you to find out whether you get good accuracy if you fit a straight line to all the data points. So if you fit a straight line, probably you might get something like this. So you get in the initial region, you get large errors. The model is does not give a very good fit. But now suppose we cluster all the data points using certain parameters. So these parameters have to be defined by you. What are most important parameters in this clustering? So let us say I identify the slope as an important parameter. So you see that in the beginning, you have a constant slope. And so let us say we take slope and the deflection as two parameters which you use for clustering. So you cluster all the points based on these distances which are computed using deflection and slope. So most likely all these points will belong to the same cluster because they have the same slope. And somewhere here you might find another cluster. Then this region have a constant slope. So this might be another cluster and so on. So you might be able to find 4 or 5 clusters in the data, and within each cluster, probably you can do a linear regression. And this model, where you have a separate equation for each cluster, that is likely to more accurately represent the curve. So we have a small exercise just to see what you have understood. How do you formulate a clustering problem for this example? What are the variables in the clustering problem is mostly to find out whether you have listened or not, because I have just explained to you how you do this. So anyway, this is a short quiz to test what you have understood. Okay, so let me look at your answers. Some of you have used your own heuristics to form the cluster, but that's not how it works. In a clustering problem, you need to define what are the variables, and you cannot say that region until yield load and all that. That's not how you define a clustering problem. But some have written, we can use the slope and deflection, which is what I also told you. Somebody has written load and deflection. That doesn't work quite well. Can somebody explain why load and deflection may not be a good way to cluster the points? My question is why load and deflection cannot be a good set of variables for performing clustering.
So, um, so it actually depends upon the problem because in some cases we might have a loading situation different from this case, but
Yeah.
the material has a yield stress and the ultimate tensile stress. So it is
Yeah.
better if we take the deflection into consideration, not load.
Right. Same load can have two deflection. No, the reason is how we are going to use this data. So typically, if you form a prediction model, you should be able to predict one variable using the other variable. Right. So let us say we want to predict the load from the deflection. Given a particular deflection, we want to predict the load. In a new data, for training, we have both the load and deflection. But in the prediction problem, you are given only the deflection and you want to find out the load. And now you want to find out which cluster this belongs to. And if you are using, they're doing clustering using load and deflection, the new point cannot be the classified into any of the clusters, right? Because you don't know the value of load, you know only the deflection. So, that's why you may not use both load and deflection for forming the cluster. So let us say we make clusters only using, okay, you make clusters using deflection and slope, and say let us say you know only the deflection. Still, you can find out with roughly which cluster it lies, and then you can probably use that equation to. Again, there is still some difficulty, but in general, it's not useful. It's not good to use even the output variable for clustering. Anyway, this is a unsupervised learning technique, so there's no distinction between input and output. But for this particular problem, I would say that it's not a good idea to use the load, but instead we can use the slope. Because we know that from looking at the curve, the slope is an important parameter which determines the relationship between the load and the deflection. But anyway, most of these exercises which I give, there is no correct answer or right answer or wrong answer. It depends on the context, but I'm just giving you my interpretation. It means load cannot be used for the, I'm saying, load is not a very good variable in this clustering problem. Probably just deflection and the slope is good enough. And slope is used in many machine learning the applications. For example, even in images, we use, we compute the histogram of gradient. Gradient is a very useful information which is used in many machine learning applications. So slope, is something which comes naturally. So here I would think the relationship is more determined by the slope rather than the load. That's why I thought slope can be a better variable for use in clustering. Okay, so most of you have written Yeah, so those are written, using heuristics, linear relation, increasing region. These are heuristics. This is not how you do clustering. For clustering, you need to define the variables. You need to define the distance function, and based on the distance function, it will assign each point to a separate cluster. I don't know whether people have used rules like this for forming cluster. Maybe they have done, but I'm not aware of it at the moment.
Sir, I have one
Okay.
question. How do we get
Yeah.
the K value? Because most of the time in my tenure, what I've solved the problems, generally we took the K value should be odd, whether it is 3, 1, 3, 5, 7, right? So
Right.
what is your comment? Means how we decide the K value, optimal K value, even though we make the program,
Right.
we make the code, and then we find out the code. It's a long lasting process if we solve the real time problems, right? So
Right.
how do we decide the K value optimally at one point
Right.
of time so that we
So
can get
this is still I would say, still an unsolved problem in machine learning. What is the optimal number of clusters? So one of my PhD student worked on it some 15 years ago. He developed a metric for determining the optimal number of clusters. He called it as a score function. You will find it in my list of publication. So the basic idea is the general principle is if you want to find out what is the quality of clusters, we want all the points within a cluster to lie as close as possible. So we want to minimize the intra-class distance, and the cluster should be as far apart as possible. So you want to maximize the distance between clusters, minimize the distance within a cluster. So for each value of k, for k equal to 2, you compute a score function which calculates what is the intra-class distance, inter-class distance, and then for k equal to 3, you do it, see how it improves, or in general, it keeps improving. So you see whether the improvement is significant or not. And if it's not that significant, then that means, you don't need to increase the number of clusters that much. Again, it depends on the distance function which you are using, but that is one way you can do it. Okay.
Sir, can elbow curve also be used to determine the number of clusters? Elbow curve.
Tell me again.
Can elbow curve be used to determine the number of clusters?
Can what be used? I didn't get.
Elbow.
Sir,
elbow
he
curve.
is talking about elbow method. Elbow.
Yeah, that is, again, how it changes, right? Yes, probably, there are people have proposed lot of different ways to determine what is the optimal number of clusters. So my students' work is probably one of the earliest work in that in this area. And today, if you search, so this paper has something like, some 70, 80 citations. A lot of people have referred to this work, but there's been a lot of work recently in the same area. So this is something, and I don't think this can be solved for sure. It's exactly like a multi-criteria optimization problem. When you have multiple of the criteria which you want to simultaneously satisfy, and how do you make a decision? This is exactly the same the situation. How do you, so there is some element of subjectivity, there is some element of trade-off between different objectives. So all these are there. But there have been proposals, and yeah, we can look at some of these cluster. It's called the cluster validity problem. Cluster validity, determining the validity of clusters. So that is the problem. If you want to know more, you can search on that. You'll find, I'm sure you'll find more recent work. I just mentioned about what my student Sandra Saita did about 15 years ago. Okay, so now let us move on. Okay, so I have quickly introduced you to the idea of clustering. We didn't look at all the algorithms in a lot of detail, but I think these are simple methods, and these can easily be implemented. Even if you write a small program, you can easily implement it. Otherwise, you can make use of any of the standard libraries for that. So that is, yeah, 2.3 was clustering. So now we go on to another method called inductive learning. A decision tree is an example of inductive learning. So induction is the process of inferring rules from a set of data. So you have a set of rules. So you say you have data about birds, and then you find that all the birds fly. So from you make a generalization that birds fly. You form a general rule which is applicable to all the birds, all the data in your data set. Later on, you might find a bird which doesn't fly, which is an exception to the rule. But using the data which you have, you might be able to find a rule which is applicable to most of the data points. So that is induction, forming a set of rules from data. Now, people don't just use rules today. Today, people use a hierarchy of rules. It's called as a decision tree. A decision tree is nothing but a hierarchy of rules. So you have a rule at the top which will divide it, which will get further subdivided and so on. It will become clear when we see an example. This famous example is the ID3.
So unable to hear the audio, sir.
Problem with the network. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Now we are
Yes,
able
sir.
to hear you, sir.
And in between there was a network disruption. That's why it said that, okay. Okay, so this is the example I used in my for my PhD. That's why you see it in my textbook, and a lot of lecture notes use this example. So this is the problem is selecting a slab system for a building. So we have the data for span and shape, and we have the corresponding value for the slab system. So now you can see, I have formed a decision tree here. This is the decision tree. So at the top of the tree, you have a rule. So you, based on the variable span, you classify the data into long span and short span. And long span, if it is long span, you see that the slab system is always a waffle slab. If it is a short span, again, you need to subdivide it into subsets based on the next variable, which is the shape. The shape can be square or rectangle. And if it is a square, you see that the slab system is two-way. If it is rectangle, it is one-way. So you form a decision tree which matches this data set. Now we'll see how we can do it using the ID3 algorithm. So this ID3 algorithm, the key aspects are explained here. You look at the data for regularities and identify discriminating features, what separates them, and choose a variable which separates the data into subsets, and you recursively separate it until you reach a set of data which is homogeneous. So here you can see, if you use span as the variable, if it is long span, it is a homogeneous set. Within this subset, you have only output variable is a single value, that is a waffle slab. So that is a good variable to separate the data into sets. So the idea is you find out variable which can be used to separate the data such that each data subset is homogeneous, containing the same value. Now the question is, how do you find out what is homogeneous? For that, we use what is called as an entropy the function. So this is the equivalent of entropy we have in the statistical physics, the entropy we have in thermodynamics. So entropy is a measure of disorder. So if you have a high temperature, the molecules are moving with a different speed. So you see the entropy is high, is a measure of disorder. Similarly, in data also, this was proposed in the context of information theory by Shannon. It's called the Shannon's entropy function. So he has come up with a formula based on information theory. It is based on sound mathematics. It's not just proposed based on his whims and fancies. It is a very mathematically sound concept. It's called the entropy, Shannon's entropy function. This function measures the inhomogeneity or the disorder in the data set. The entropy is zero when the data is perfectly homogeneous, like zero temperature. When everything is comes to a standstill, perfectly homogeneous data set. And as you increase the temperature, entropy increases. So where there is more disorder, you have high value for the entropy. So we use entropy to find out the disorder in the data set. So this ID3 algorithm works like this. You try to find out one data set. You try to find out one variable which separates the data into homogeneous subset. So you calculate what is the entropy and what is the change in entropy as you select each variable, and you select the variable with the maximum entropy. So let us see it with this example. So you have two options here. We have two variables, span and shape. So if you take span as the variable, we can calculate the entropy of the resulting subsets. So if you take span as the variable, you have two subsets. In one subset, everything is a waffle slab. So if you compute the entropy, that will be zero entropy. Everything is exactly the same homogeneous subset. And the other subset has a mixture which consists of two-way and one-way. So you calculate the average entropy, you will see that this is the variable which produces maximum the change in the entropy. So we select span as the variable to separate it into two subsets. If we have taken the shape as the subset, we have two options here, square and rectangle. You will see that if it is square, it can be either a waffle or two-way. Rectangle also similarly, you have waffle and one-way. If they both are inhomogeneous sets, so it doesn't help much. So we want as homogeneous as possible. So you get maximum reduction in entropy if you select span as the variable. So this is how you select the first variable, and using the value of this variable, you divide into subset. And for each subset, you again repeat the process, find another variable which will further subdivide and so on. So ideally, we want to get homogeneous subset. In practice, we may not get a completely homogeneous subset. We might still get a mixture of values in the last subset. So this is basically the ID3 algorithm, and this decision tree which you get can even be written in the form of rules of the form if else. So we saw in rule-based expert system we form rules. So here we can convert whatever the ID3 algorithm has come up with into a set of rules. So we can say if span equal to the slab is waffle, else shape equal, you can convert it into a different form. This is another way to represent it, but traditionally we represent it as a tree structure like this. That's why it's called as a decision tree. Now a small exercise, the same, what I have taken as earlier is an example from conceptual structural design. Now I've taken something from robotics. You want to select a motor for a robot. let's say you are doing a hobby electronics, or maybe for a real prototype, you want to select a motor. So we have different options. So these numbers actually I've taken from actual product data sheets. I've taken the torque for for different types of motors. So we have stepper motor, we have DC servo motor, AC servo motor. And for each of these, I've given taken the torque value from the data sheet. So we have this is a numeric variable, but I converted into symbolic variable for the purpose of using in the ID3 algorithm. So I convert this into low and high. Torque can be low or high. And then another variable is whether it is continuous rotation, whether it is capable of rotating continuously, or it can rotate only by a specific angle. So we have two variables. Ignore the actual torque value, just use only the torque class and whether it is able to rotate continuously or not. And then we want to form a decision tree using this data. So this is the exercise you can have to do. Form a decision tree. So the only two variables, so it has only two levels. So what the root node, you find out what is the variable, whether it should be torque class or whether it should be a continuous rotation. So this is the exercise you have to do. So spend a couple of minutes to complete this.
Hello, sir.
Yes, yeah.
Yes, sir. Sir, before deciding, sir, we must know that what is good or bad for the robot. So, what is good, sir?
What is good for the robot, but you need to define what is good and what is bad. So we have two parameters. Whether it can rotate continuously and what is the torque. So torque is important for us because for the particular robot, we know what is the torque required. So you need to select an appropriate the motor which can take the torque, right? So we you get some idea about, see, I have given only limited data set, just a few the stepper motors and the servo motors, AC, DC. But in general, we have the catalog with lot of data points. But to guide in the selection of the appropriate motor, we can roughly look at the torque range and the requirement, whether it should be continuous or not. And then we select one of the types. You might find multiple types, in your decision tree. You may not get a homogeneous set. You get a few types, and you need to examine only those sets to select the motor. Right? So it's a guide to selecting the motor rather than giving a value straight away. Is that your question?
Yes, this answers, sir. Thank you, sir.
Right. Okay, so now let me look at your answers. So the answer is the split into almost equal half. 56% says root node should be the torque class, and another 43, slightly less, says it should be continuous rotation. So I'll ask one of you to explain why you think the root node should be this or that. Can somebody
think, sir,
explain why you,
if
yeah.
if I apply the Gini index, so the gain is more in continuous rotation as compared to the torque class, because it is 50-50% probability. No, half of the response are no and half of the response are yes.
Yeah, you said the Gini index, right?
Yeah.
But
So
you know, in we use entropy in ID3 algorithm. We use entropy. It is a different metric, but it's similar idea. So
Yeah.
so what you're saying is, so what is your answer?
My answer is continuous rotation, sir.
Okay, so let us look at continuous rotations. We have two possibilities, yes or no. So if it is no, we have a homogeneous set of only stepper motors. And if it is yes, it can be either DC servo or AC servo. So if you in entropy, I didn't give you the equation for entropy. It's a very simple equation. It is pi times log pi, but you need to do the calculation to see exactly what you get from the entropy. But qualitatively, we can see that there is, in the first set, there is no variation at all. So entropy is 0. In the second set, it is equally distributed. Whereas if you take the torque class, the first one, for low value, you have two possibilities, AC servo and stepper, and you have more variation, right? So the first one, so it's correct that continuous rotation is a better one, because you get more homogeneity in the subset, data subset. So what you said is correct. But in reality, if you want to do this, you have to use the formula for entropy. I didn't include it and I skipped it, but it's a simple formula. Pi multiplied by log pi. You sum over all the data sets, where pi is if you draw the histogram, if there are p, let's say we have k items of a particular type, in that I think k divided by the total number, that will be the probability. So you have to need to just sum over it. So qualitatively I have explained, but we won't go into the details. If you are interested, you can look at, you can read some textbook on it. So now exactly how it performs this the classification. So let us say now we saw in the case of symbolic variables how it works. Now in reality, so the original ID3 algorithm was only for symbolic variables. Later on, people extended it to even continuous variables. So if you have continuous value for x1 and x2, so let us say in this case x1 is a binary variable. You have only two possibilities, but x2 has is a continuous variable, can take different values. Let us see how the algorithm works. So it will try us to decide between x1 and x2, which should be used to separate the data. So here I have shown the two classes, one in the colored one, smaller one, and the other one much bigger one. So if you choose the variable x1, you will see that there is more the homogeneous separation. So you take that as the first variable. So it is divided into box like this. You end up with two boxes using the variable x1. and you get two subsets. For each of these subset, you will look for variable to divide the subset into further subset. So now you see that for this subset, if you take the value of x2, if you split it at this point, this becomes a homogeneous set and this becomes a homogeneous set. Similarly, if you divide at this point, yeah, you get a homogeneous subset here, and this is also a homogeneous subset. So this is how an ID3 algorithm splits data into subsets. So this it is divided like a box. If you look at other algorithms, they look at the combination of values of variables. Here, it doesn't look at the combination at every stage. It takes only one variable to decide on how to separate the data into subsets. So this is the characteristic of the ID3 algorithm.
Sir, what is the best way to cut, since you have shown this example, what is the best way to cut the tree, prune the tree? Because here we have only 4 or 5 homogeneous data based on the classification. So what is the best way to prune the tree? Because if the data sets is enlarged, for example, it has 1 million data sets or 2 million data sets, then in that sense, the decision tree would be complex. So what is the best way to prune the tree?
Are the variables continuous or discrete?
Sir, it is
You have
continuous.
if you have 1 million data points, but if each variable takes only two values,
Right.
so you can select the variable which separates into two subsets such that which is as homogeneous as possible. Okay. So if you find x1, if you use the value of x1 to separate into two subsets, it may be 1 million data points or 10 data points, doesn't matter. We just look at what is the homogeneity of the subsets. So based on that, we decide whether we should use x1 or x2 to separate it into subsets. Now, if it is a continuous variable, I didn't explain how the algorithm works, but basically we use some heuristic, heuristic procedure to find out the best way to separate it. So maybe, you can take the midpoint first and see. So for x2, maybe you start with the midpoint of the values and see what is the homogeneity of the two subsets. Then you move this to the next point. You remove one point at a time, keep moving it, see where you get an improvement, maximum improvement in your entropy. So that you select as the best location to split the data. Okay. For a continuous variable, it is slightly more complex. In the case of discrete variable, it's much more straightforward. But people use this type of heuristic to determine the optimal point where you can make the split to separate the data.
Got it, sir. Got it, sir. Got it. Yeah,
Right.
got it, sir.
Okay. Okay, so we, I think we'll just take 5 more minutes and then we will stop. Okay, now the ID3 algorithm is very old. It's from the 70s. People have been using it and it's very popular. Now people have gone beyond the decision trees. Now we are talking about forests. In the 70s, people were only talking about trees, but now people are talking about forests. Why they are doing that is because people found that these decision trees are very sensitive to certain variables, especially in cases where the improvement is not that much and the initial node we select completely changes the output. Depending on if there is any ambiguity in selecting the first node, if the data is slightly different, you can get a completely different tree. So it could be very sensitive to the initial nodes depending on the data set. So it can end up with a lot of error in the prediction because we take only one variable at a time and it is a greedy procedure, greedy descent procedure. At each stage you find what is the best. You are not looking at the combination of variables. So it could be very sensitive to the data set. If the data set is slightly different, the separation could be completely different and you can get a completely different answer altogether. So to avoid this, to make it more robust, people thought that we can create multiple trees. Instead of just relying on a single tree, we can do multiple trees and see how the prediction changes with from one tree to the other. So it gave rise to what are called as ensemble methods, group of methods. You apply the different algorithms together and see what works best. So there are a number of ensemble methods, and one of it is the random forest. So you don't predict using one tree alone. You create multiple decision trees and see how the prediction changes in the whole forest itself. So this is the idea of an ensemble method. Now, if you strictly follow the ID3 algorithm, there is only one decomposition. At any stage, you select the one with the maximum entropy, the reduction in the entropy. So you get only one. But then how do you create multiple trees? So for that, you need to use different data sets. So what I've written here is, I've written this term called bootstrapping. Bootstrapping is a procedure for generating multiple data sets from the original data. So in your data, you might have, let's say, 1,000 data points. Now you can use, instead of using all the 1,000, maybe you use only 500. You randomly sample your data set, you select some 500 of that. So you use the first 500 to train the first tree, and then repeat the process, do the sampling, select another 500, form another tree, and potentially these trees could be completely different and could predict something totally different. So with multiple trees, you see what is the prediction. And for all these ensemble methods, we need to have some method of aggregating the information. So one method is bagging. So in machine learning, we hear these terms, bagging and boosting. So this is the technique called bagging, where the output from different algorithms, which are computed in parallel, are aggregated to produce the final output. A simple method is just take the average prediction or the prediction with the maximum vote. So this is a technique. So these are called ensemble methods, where you make use of multiple algorithms, multiple models for doing the prediction. And these tend to be more robust than just using a single one. So this is the idea of bagging. There you see another term called boosting. That uses an ensemble method which uses multiple models, but it is applied one after the other, sequential. You develop one model which has a certain prediction. To improve the prediction, the accuracy, you add another algorithm on top of that. After that, so you apply in sequence. That is called boosting. So these are two recent ideas that have come about for improving the accuracy of prediction. And in all these machine learning competitions, inevitably people use these to win. Without this, using the original algorithms is just not possible to compete at all. So I think we will stop now, and we will continue tomorrow at 9:30. Remember, you have a small quiz also in the afternoon tomorrow, based on what we have covered so far. And only if you take the quiz with some minimum marks, it will be a simple quiz, but you need to pass it in order to win the participant certificate. I think the marks will be, the cutoff marks will be very low. It will be a simple test, but I want to make sure that at least you have learned something from this course. So that's why I'm doing this quiz, which will be tomorrow afternoon, and tomorrow morning we'll start again at 9:30. Any questions so far? Whatever we have covered so far.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, right. If you have no questions, I will stop.
Hello,
Thank you,
sir.
sir.
Sir,
Yeah, tell me.
sir,